In this episode of Uplift and Elevate, we welcome Tara, a seasoned 20-year veteran in the creative industry. Beginning her career in advertising as an artist, she ascended to the role of creative director before transitioning to supervise blockbuster films such as WandaVision and The Marvels. Her journey is one of empowerment, and she is here to graciously share her insights. Welcome, Tara. Can you share your early life experiences and how that shaped you into the person you are today?
As a child, I loved to read. I really enjoyed being immersed in stories. And as an adult, I still love to read and being immersed in stories. All of my young creative output was an attempt to capture what was in my imagination and an attempt to show what existed in the world on a page or in a photograph. I really enjoyed drawing and photography, not so much painting, but I painted a fair amount. And I eventually made my way to a fine art college, which was not a traditional path for suburban American kids. The art college I went to was formative. I started in high school, actually, taking classes there, and loved really being pushed creatively to try and try and try and fail, and to try to make better and better things, and to try media that I had never thought about using and to see what spoke to me. So that art school process was incredibly formative. In that fine art school, I found like-minded individuals who wanted to create images. And I also found mentors in my professors and also in my fellow students, people whose work inspired me. And I continue to find that inspiration in my colleagues' work, in my peers' work, in other books and films. And I think that finding your people is one of the keys to having a successful career and to making work that you enjoy. One of the things that I learned in art school was really how to fail, how to try something and be terrible at it, and to keep working at that skill until I got slowly better and better. It was incredibly important to have the space to fail and not be judged harshly for the attempt, but to be given constructive feedback about how to do better and then to reapply myself to do better. Finding individuals who I could then go to and ask specifics like, hey, I really wanted this to look like something. How do I get there? And finding the people, and again, it doesn't have to be professors, it could be peers, it could be other students, but to find that collaboration and to accept feedback without ego was huge from my young life, where, as kids, you're often rewarded with praise for a job well done. And in the modern era, we reward kids for grit, which I love and appreciate, because there is something super valuable and rewarding about trying, failing, sometimes failing a lot, trying again and finding a solution. Like, there's no greater satisfaction to me than achieving something after multiple attempts and like cracking whatever the code is, be it like visual or literal code, so that you can achieve a result, maybe one you didn't imagine, maybe one you didn't expect, but something that resonates either visually to you or, now in features to an audience or to your director or your studio, like some kind of emotional response in the work you're making is huge.
I was just curious about, in terms of the not giving up, was that always a characteristic when you were a child? Because going into something new and something that you're learning, sometimes after a little while, oftentimes people just give up, but you really persevered through it. And even what I think is an adult thing is going and asking for people's feedback as well. Not often does that happen. So where did you get that from? Where does that come from?
Honestly, having people in my life that looked at the work and gave criticism and made suggestions gently was key as a child. Children are often really sensitive to failure. And trust me, I had many, many, many artistic failures trying to make something cool, having an idea of what would be cool, and then seeing the result, and it was wildly underwhelming. And then working with a teacher or a relative who would both praise the work, praise the effort, and then occasionally some gem of a teacher would say, hey, why don't you try this? And nudge me in the direction of making something slightly better was the gentle way of finding grit. It probably wasn't until high school or college that I made work that actively didn't resonate and got real feedback and had to embrace that feedback. You know, it can sting, but it's only in the service of either pushing you as a person to make better work or even make work that resonates. You can make things for yourself, but sometimes you also want to make them for an audience.
Do you have any first job stories?
I was fortunate enough to begin computer work sort of in the 2000s, late 90s .com boom, and that opened a big door for young people to make things that were somewhat confounding to the older generation. I am now definitely part of that older generation, but I will say that, you know, I tried a lot of jobs as a PA, runner, intern, worked in many different places for free part-time. I always had a job that paid, a
Oh,
job
wow.
that I could do, well, not, I mean, not well. I was a Mac lab monitor at college whose job was essentially to reset printers for $10 an hour. But I think that
That's
in
pretty good.
addition to your, yeah, in addition to your main gig, whatever that is, the thing that pays your rent and buys you snacks, I think that it was important to have a second job that was what I wanted to do. And I didn't have to do it full time. Often, if you're working for free, people can be gracious and say, yes, come in 1 or 2 days a week for a few hours and we'll train you for free. And then eventually you'll get paid to do that job. And as a young person, I did that a lot. I think my first job that I only worked one job was when I joined the mill in New York in 2003. But I started having computer jobs in 1999. There was a little window there where I always hustled. You know, my main job paid rent 40 hours a week, sometimes 32 hours a week, living with roommates, eating ramen. And then the evening gig where people were generous and took their time to teach me. Granted, I wasn't paid, but I also wasn't making very much for them. So it was an investment in both people's parts, mine of time and theirs of energy, so that eventually I could learn that skill and get a job doing it.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that's seems like very creative way in where it's you generally have a lot of side hustles going on just to try to make things work to gain
Yeah,
that experience.
it's an interesting thing, the side hustle. It wasn't commonly recognized as a way in until the last 10 years. People turned their side hustles into their jobs all over the place. I mean, I think that's what Etsy is made of. But I will say that there is a thing to, if you want to learn a skill that's hard to learn and maybe there isn't a lot of access, it's hard to be paid to learn that skill. So you might need to not have dinners with your friends or go out at night. A lot of times, those jobs that I took that were unpaid were in the evenings.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd go from my day job that would end at 6 or 7, and then I'd work from 7 to 11 or 12, training and learning, only 2 or 3 nights a week, not, 7. I still got to see my friends and I still got to have a life, but I definitely put in evenings that could have been spent otherwise training. And within 6 months or a year, that training is going to become a role. Like that work is always necessary to put in the time. It's just whether or not you're going to be trained sort of on the job, on your own, on your weekend. When do you want to spend that time? If you want that role, you got to put it in.
Yeah, and it's a great way to build relationships as well because then a lot more people know about you and that you're a really good, honest worker who's just really passionate about what you want to do. So I think that goes a long way as well.
Agreed. I think that if you are putting in your own time, the mentors, the potential mentors around you are a lot more gracious with their time in terms of sitting to teach you a particular technique or talk to you about the way that things work. Something that was also really important in formative years was that it was pre-iPod, pre-headphone. I think that there is something incredibly important about being in a space with other people, listening to what is going on around you, because it creates empathy in you for what they're going through in their own creative or technical struggles. And it also gives you an awareness of the process around you. What, oh my goodness, is that shot hard to track? Why is it hard to track? Oh, did that thing not stick? Like, what is happening at the workstations around you or in the creative challenges around you that maybe you can learn through osmosis and eventually either have an idea to pitch in and help solve the problem, which is unbelievable to everyone around, or later, when you encounter that yourself, either have hope that someone else has struggled the same struggle, or you've listened and thought, oh, you know what? So and so had this problem a month ago when they were sitting next to me. I wonder if they can help me crack this code. And those communications are challenging when everybody's remote all the time. I fully believe in a hybrid for all artists and all humans. I think it's very hard to learn in a vacuum. I have trouble learning in a vacuum. I like to go and work with other people and ask them questions and have them poke holes in the things I've made, tell me what could be better. And I also think that when we are all in a theater or a screening room or even an office looking at images together and talking about them, ideas can come from anywhere. And if you're paying attention to the conversations around you, sometimes you'll be asked, what do you think the solution is? Good solutions come from everywhere. There, I went to a talk that Victoria Alonso gave recently at an event, and she was talking about how everyone has ideas, and there's 1,000 failed ideas before the one good idea makes it through. I mean, that is true. And the idea is not always mine, and it's not always yours. It might come from the person who's just been listening. And so I think it's important to listen as often as you can so that you, when you're invited to the table, you have an idea.
I'm furiously agreeing with you, nodding behind the scenes because 100%, absolutely. Listen, pay attention. This is your time. It's just getting to know things around you as well, like you're saying. So couldn't agree more.
I support everyone's quality of life. I think that freshest brains have rest and have moved their bodies and have maybe had a vegetable. And your brain works great if you give your body all of the things it needs to function effectively. I also think that sometimes that means that you have to commute into an office that you don't want to go to, because there are invaluable skills beyond the technical and creative in presenting your work that are what are often referred to as soft skills that you can only glean from really being in a room with other people without distraction, without a laptop or a computer, where you're really listening to the conversation and how people will talk around cracking a creative problem. When I was training, the company I worked with, The Mill, was actually excellent at putting two artists in a room together. There would always be a senior artist, a lead, and a junior artist who sat next to them as an assist. Sometimes it became a project room, like as computers got smaller and we could have remote workstations, you'd put 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 monitors in a big project suite. And personally, I gleaned a lot from listening to the presentation skills of the senior artists around me and how they approached a potentially tricky client, a potentially angry director, someone who was frustrated that maybe we didn't have enough time left to achieve the wild idea. And there are words for how to navigate those situations that aren't, I'm sorry, it's too late. I work with an artist who I adore who keeps a notebook of phrases to use in other situations.
Such a great
It's
idea.
not it's not a bad idea. I mean, I used to ask all my artists when they were learning to keep a notebook of how long you think the shot is going to take and how long it actually took. Because that is also a skill, being able to say to this director who might be really intense, yes, you can have that in 2 days. Is that a real 2 days or is that your imaginative 2 days? And if you've kept track of your time, then you'll know that's a real 2 days. And then that director trusts you when it comes in 2 days. And some of those skills around communicating what the work actually takes and what it will take to achieve it, often, we get asked crazy things. We're talking about visual effects. It's nuts. People want walking, talking, emoting characters and fantastical worlds and vehicles that you believe are there. I mean, all kinds of tactile things that exist have to be recreated in a digital environment. And if you are honest about the amount of work that that takes, sometimes the request will resolve itself, but it helps to be kind and empathetic in your honesty because the person's only asking, be that a director or a studio person or an advertising agency client or even another artist. They're asking because they think it'll make it better, not because they want to make your life harder, although it seems that way often. Having a little bit of empathy for where the request comes from helps. And then also having that little library of presentation tools that come from being in the room. It's huge.
That's a great tip, and I totally agree. It is all about that because you're put on the spot and it's a lot of pressure. It's just helpful just to have something written down, and even taking your idea further with the days, you can even project ahead of time the questions that might arise from that presentation with the director or the creative, and then write some simple notes down and keep to it. So that way you don't feel obliged to, because you're under pressure, to say a time or an ETA that might not be the real ETA, just because you need to say something and they might get upset because you said 4 days instead of 3.
Oh, actually, that brings up an excellent point. I have two excellent points that I go back to all the time personally, and that when I work with folks, it's two of my main training tidbits of advice. Number one, you can always ask for the time to figure out a good answer. There is not a situation that exists that I can think of where you can't ask for more time to come up with a good answer. Secret number two is that it's okay to rehearse your meeting. It is okay to pull up the playlist or the PDF or the email or whatever it is you want to say when you're presenting it to someone who's important to you. It's okay to practice. It's important to have cohesive ideas, and we don't all come up with them in the very moment that we're looking at the image. Sometimes that takes a lot of practice too. When I want to say something important and concise, I think about it ahead of time. Sometimes I pull up the image and actually say it ahead of time. I often have prepared my thoughts before I say them to other people. It seems off the cuff, but it isn't. It doesn't have to be. It's important for you as an artist or a supervisor or a producer to know what your key points are. You don't need a full script, but it is very important to have key points written down or memorized in the way that you remember them.
And then even pulling someone aside and rehearsing with them as well.
Oh, totally. We, in our little visual effects team for both WandaVision and The Marvels, before we have a big meeting, we rehearse the meeting. We just make sure that we know what we want to talk about in each shot and that we're happy with what we're talking about.
Given the ever-evolving nature of the creative industry, how have you navigated changes and challenges throughout your career? Are there any specific trends or shifts that have significantly impacted you?
As an artist and a supervisor, my North Star is working with my director or my agency creatives or my studio to give the best image quality I can achieve from our intended story. That means working with the director and the director of photography to collaborate and decide how we want to make something and how we want it to look in the end, with concept art and tests and all manner of experimentation at the beginning so that we have an idea of where we're going.
Are there any particular memorable successes and lows in your career that may have contributed to your growth and dedication to the field?
I had a few memorable successes, which I will talk about in a minute. I think that the failures were in instances where we, as a team, me as an artist, as a compositor, we didn't have enough time to execute something the proper way. We tried to cut corners, usually at the request of a director who also didn't have enough time. And the thing we made just didn't look great. And that is a big bummer to me. And I try to protect myself and my teams and my future directors from letting that happen, with sometimes kind but brutal honesty about my fear if something will look good or not. I think that that's not the scariest failure is in visual effects, is finishing something that doesn't live up to sort of a playable standard for what looks all right. A great piece of advice from the fantastic Chris Townsend, which I share all the time, is particularly in a feature to let everything get to a B plus, like a pretty solid playable standard before you push your most beautiful things to look like an A plus, because nothing will pull an audience out of a story faster than an amazing looking thing followed by a not so great looking thing. We have all been there and we have all run out of time. So I do like to polish across the film as best as possible and get it all up to a level. And sometimes that means telling very excited artists that they have to stop working on the cool thing for a couple of weeks or even a couple of hours and work on the not so cool thing so that it all plays nicely. Mega important to keep that in mind. You never want to be pulled out of the thing you're watching because one thing doesn't look so great. And then this is a slightly dark success, but I'm going to tell it anyway. You know, I have a friend, a dear friend, who has been through breast cancer twice. And I was with her in her chemo appointment in her most recent bout with cancer on the day that my old boss and creative director called to congratulate me on having won ad meter for the Super Bowl, which is like the biggest thing you can do. I mean, you can also get a Super Clio, but my spot was the #1 spot of the year, and it was such a big deal. And it was so sweet of him to call, and he did not know that I was sitting in an oncology center. And I think it's important to have balance so that you understand why you're making things, how you make them, who they're for, and to allow yourself to have time to be with those people when you need them and to keep making work for you, and then to also take the time when you need it.
Absolutely.
My less hard story is so joyful. We filmed WandaVision in these beautiful sets that Mark Worthington created, that were based on very specific periods of television. And we filmed the episode from the 80s, like the 80s/90s, in this super Family Ties looking house. And the VFX work in that house wasn't mega crazy. It was work that we knew how to do. It was wire removal and adding Wanda's power and removing a little bit of rigs and massaging Vision's panels onto his human face and a little bit of magic. The scene where Wanda and Vision fight in the living room and raise up and sort of yell at each other and embrace was so intense and so well acted that on the day I just enjoyed being there. Wasn't really thinking too much about our technical work. So much fan art has been created of that scene. People love that scene. They love that scene, and there's also the scene where they're sitting on Wanda's bed in Sokovia and they talk about grief. And people respond so deeply and wildly and wonderfully to those interactions between Wanda and Vision and what their emotions were in those scenes, and have recreated that in their own artwork. I love that our visual effects is so invisible that it elevates the scene and allows people to connect to that work. When we finished it, I had no idea that those would be the impactful shots. We thought about our big cool work, and we were super excited about our big cool work, or the black and white work, because how radical to make cool black and white stuff. I loved seeing the fan art from WandaVision. It was really exceptional and really touching, and it was really moving to see how much those two characters meant to people and that we were able to support that vision, literally.
It is heartwarming, I'm sure. Is that something that keeps you going in your career, do you think, when you've got the fans online cherishing the work?
When fans respond positively to our work, it definitely helps make the time and the effort worthwhile, and that recommitment to quality, pushing yourself to make the best version of something you possibly can.
How important has it been to have a mentor in your life and your career?
They are incredibly important to growth and to development, and to have a sounding board outside of what's spinning in your own head. They don't always have the answer, and you can't always follow their advice, but I think it is excellent to talk out the problem with someone who you trust.
Do you change mentors throughout your careers in like every few years, just naturally, organically, or has it been similar people?
I think you collect them like Pokemon.
Yeah.
I think you have the mentors that you loved or working with when you were young. I think it's important to stay in touch with them even loosely as you grow, because it's wonderful to reconnect with them and to talk about where you've both gone in the time.
Yeah, and keeping in touch. It's a difficult one, especially in our industry, um, just because of the constant distractions of work and deadlines. But I think that's a key takeaway
I mean,
is
it's
keeping in
true.
touch.
I think that it's hard to keep in touch, but you really only need a coffee. And it really only has to be once a year or every couple of years. It's mostly that when I'm in the city of those mentors, I message them. I mean, I have a couple that live far away that whenever I think of them, I just send them a message where it says, "Hey, I was thinking about you. How's it going?" And maybe a conversation that's key stems from there. And maybe it's just a check in. And you said a nice thing. Like, it doesn't always have to be a give and take. It can just be a coffee and a catch up, and that's
Yeah, don't
okay.
overthink it.
No, I also think that, we don't all have the luxury of being able to go to conferences, but conferences are another way to learn, grow, see people. I know that some of the target audience for this particular podcast is younger people who are getting into the industry or are growing in their careers. I was a SIGGRAPH volunteer for all of college. I applied. I slept in a hotel room with three other girls. It was two per queen bed. They give you meal vouchers, and you get to attend the conference and see the work. And I sat through all kinds of dense courses about the code behind software that might not have been for me, but I learned a little bit about what goes into the software we all use. I think that those opportunities, you can think of it as giving yourself the gift of time or giving yourself the gift of learning. Again, it might mean that you don't go on that vacation with your friends or that weekend out of town, but if you want to feel empowered and like you met some peers, it's another great way to spend your time.
Is there any advice or takeaways that you could provide in getting into the creative industry? I know you mentioned SIGGRAPH and participating in those sort of events, but is there anything else that you might share with them?
I have something to say that might not be wildly popular, in that you end up getting hired for the job you're already doing in most of your life. That is almost universally true. I cannot think of very many people that get hired to the job above them without already having some of those skills. You do not need to have all of them, and you can be honest. If a role lists 10 things and you have 5 or 7, you can go to that interview or take that meeting and be honest and say, I can smash 3 of these. I'm pretty good at 4 of them. And these couple of things I really don't know, but I'm keen to learn. And these are the things I've been thinking about anyway. I personally love honesty. I love, as an employer and someone who recruits and hires, real deal honesty. You do not need to fluff your resume for me. I can tell anyway. But I think that often young people that I work with now want to be promoted into a role where they don't have all the skills yet. And often you have to show me that you can do some of them. So there might be a 6-month or year-long overlap where you're in between, where you're already doing that next job, and maybe you don't have the title yet, and maybe you haven't gotten the pay rise yet, but you've started to take on the responsibilities for that job. And it makes it a lot easier for me to go to the people who control all the salaries and the titles and argue on your behalf if you are already doing some of the role. And it is much easier to be hired into a new role if you're already competent in some of the tasks. So I think that it's great. There's a funny phrase that I've grown to embrace, the punching above your weight. But I think some of punching above your weight means doing the work, and some of doing the work means doing more than you are expected to. Because if you are already doing more than the expectation, you will be promoted significantly faster than the people who clock in and clock out and only do the task that's in front of them. Additionally, if you don't know what that is that's extra, ask. If you would like to work your way up a ladder and you're doing the tasks in front of you and you are flummoxed as to what to do next, ask for a meeting or again a coffee or a tea with your manager or your supervisor or your producer and say, hey, I'd really love to work my way into X role. What are my next steps? That person will be happy to tell you, and they'll be happy to tell you about which ones to do first, or where there's a need, or how you can grow. And maybe that becomes part of your day-to-day, and it doesn't have to be extra. But I think that there's a lot of reward for folks with initiative who check in and ask for feedback and guidance about how to grow. And also, that allows you, the person who's maybe not put yourself in a pressure cooker situation of being paid for something you don't know how to do, the opportunity to fail without any repercussion. If you, as an artist, ask me for something hard, and I say, well, I don't know, that's hard. Do you want to try? That gives you the permission to try and maybe not succeed without the fear of a significant repercussion. Like, oh my goodness, I entrusted you and now you failed us all. Like there's a way to create, again, a learning buffer for yourself before you take that big next step or really fight for that promotion or that pay rise or the thing. Work your way into it. It allows everyone the opportunity to try and fail, or maybe get a little more time to try and succeed. Let me go again. It's okay to do something twice. It happens to us all. I think that there are a lot of people, myself included, who in my life have been upset that my hard work wasn't recognized. But each of the managers has their own set of challenges, and they do not live inside your mind. And they are not inside the minutia of what it took each artist and coordinator and producer to achieve a result. Sometimes you have to tell them what steps you took and how your time is worth a reward or a compensation. You have to spell it out. Everybody's busy and everybody has a boss.
What's one thing people assume about you that isn't true?
One thing that people might assume is that this job is easy or carefree or chill. I purposefully keep a light tone in my conversations, both for my own stress and sanity and for those around me. But make no mistake, there is a constant rededication to time and craft, and I take the work very, very seriously. I expect my team to take the work seriously, and I expect all of the artists underneath me to take the work seriously. And once we have dedicated ourselves each day and put in a healthy amount of effort to achieving something we're proud of, then everybody should go home. But it's not chill. Even though I try very hard to be both friendly and kind and calm and respectful, it's serious business. It's hard work. It's really hard work. It's constant. It's constantly critiquing yourself and finding ways to push again and to repolish and to recommit and to make sure that you are delivering the best thing you possibly can.
I think that creates a good atmosphere, though. Just having that composure. It's
Yeah.
comes with experience as well.
Oh man, yeah. If you're going to lose your composure, it's good to go off on your own and have a moment and take a breath. Again, ask for time. Say, I need a minute, and lose your composure somewhere else.
What does finding the right team to work with look like?
Finding the right team often involves networking, meeting people, asking for recommendations and references outside your normal hiring practices. I look at places like the Array Network, and I look at Free the Work, Alma Harrell's group that came out of Free the Bid for inclusive hiring. I also would look at LinkedIn and I'd talk to people and I'd ask around for who is looking for a job and who did a good job on a previous show that you might want to meet. I think that it involves staying in constant communication with people that you have once loved working with to see if they're available again, or if not, if they have a colleague that they could recommend. You know, my personal style of communication might not be for everyone, but I think that it's important to cast as broad a net as you can reasonably do to find the right people for the right roles and to make sure that that team, again, are respectful and thoughtful and want to be there. That it is a job, but also we all have to want to be there. It's a lot of hours. And then once you've assembled that team, I think it's really important to have regular check-ins about what we're achieving together creatively, about how the day-to-day is operating, and about how their experiences and my experiences. When I was at the mill, some we did some workshops about best practices for feedback and management and people management. And one of the things that I learned in that time was this 3-3-3 rule for feedback, and that what are three things you want the person to start doing, what are three things you want the person to stop doing, and what are the three things you want them to keep doing. And I think that that's important for them and also for me. I think that you can, as the person under me, can say, hey, you know, this really helped me when you gave me feedback in this particular way. Or I really didn't understand when you said XYZ. And that will help me understand how best to communicate. I think that our internal process is all communication and understanding one another, both in our daily workings, like who likes what kind of coffee and what thing do they need to be effective in their job, And then also in the greater creative goal, like how do you give a good, clear note so that the artist halfway around the world understands how we need to make the shot better.
It's really good structure to follow and easy. And then over the course of the years that you've been in the industry, are there any companies that you've worked at or experiences that you can share that you've had that's worked well?
I've had the privilege of working at companies that really value their staff and their people and are inclusive in their hiring, which is part of how I'm here in the first place, but also are just respectful of humans and their time. The supervisors I worked under in my whole early career at the mill were really, really wonderful about teaching and training, and they believed in growth. And so I benefited from that. And then at my time at Marvel, everyone is super collaborative and respectful. They all expect very hard work, but you will not be spoken to poorly or have a negative experience in that manner. Some of my onset experiences, which were a long time ago, were not so great, but that is also changing with culture and time. I think that Me Too did a lot of good for all of us, and I think that some of these initiatives are criticized, but they are ultimately beneficial, and I do believe in them. My personal North Star is to keep working with good people and good creative. I think that you are spending a lot of your own time making this work. It's a lot of hours. There's no one that will fight you on the idea that visual effects is a lot of hours. So I think it's important to try to find those situations where you enjoy being there and feel valued and respected. I think that there are many, many, many situations where it might not be optimal. It might be lucrative, but it might not be optimal. And sometimes, personally for me, it's worth finding the situation that is the best, and not always the paycheck is the best. It's unfortunate that that is the way that that Venn diagram lies, but sometimes they're paying you to be in a place that maybe isn't great. I always choose being at a place I like being. It allows me to, grow.
That's a really good point about the people. It's not always about how lucrative the experience is, but it is the people, because you're going to be spending a lot of your time with them. So it's important that you at least get a sense of them if you don't know them very well, or try if you have the ability to work with people you have worked with in the past or are well recommended. We believe in making a ripple of change. So with that in mind, who would you like to see as a guest on our next podcast?
There's an amazing recruiter called Anne Hong that I worked with when I was back at the mill, and she created these amazing learning programs for the artists there. She created a Learning at Work week where people would present their skills, and she was excellent at finding talent and at inspiring talent. So I think she would be a great guest for this podcast. I also think that our picture editor, Katrine Hedstrom from The Marvels, is an amazing candidate for this podcast. She has a mystical way about finding her creative path and works in an Avid, which is this technical piece of software, to try to craft a story that's mostly emotion. And I think that she has a wild way of working around a problem. She and I are almost opposite in our approach, in that I tend to be quite linear, but I loved working with her on the Marvels, and I think that she would have a lot to say.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Tara, and thank you for sharing your journey and all the incredible career tips. Thanks everyone for listening to Uplift and Elevate. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, follow us on Instagram, and reach out if you're interested in getting involved and learning more about our work.